Welcome to the Listen to This Bull live show. My name is Matthew Mulholland. This is Remington Huggins. This is the show where you get to ask any kind of question about the insurance industry that you want, and we'll answer it. And then you can also ask questions about how much Remington can bench lift or something along those lines. And I'll answer for him in a tiny little voice. It'll be fun. We also bring on guests to the show, and today we have Steve Patrick. He is legendary. The guy's been doing this so long. I think that the whole industry came around when he was born, something along those lines. He is in the wings right now, waiting to come on. What we want to do is ask him a bunch of questions. He has a very different approach, a very simplistic, sensical approach to how to do things. And I think it resonates with a lot of people. I know as a public adjuster, I often get a little bit into the weeds on the details and in the very specific items. Steve can dumb it down for us all and make it a little bit easier to understand. So I always appreciated that about him.
There you go.
Honest, good dude. And I'm going to bring him on. I hope you're ready, Steve.
I am. So, hey, guys, how you doing?
Steve.
Great to be on the show.
Thank you. Now, Steve, I'm going to enjoy a beer while we're talking. Cheers.
Well, there you go. I would expect nothing less from you, Matthew.
Good.
Hey, Steve, I love the American flag behind you there. Yeah, that's great.
My son made that from pallets, and he stained it, and each one of those stars is hand carved.
That is awesome. My wife does the same exact stuff. So right when I saw it, I knew it came from some type of woodcraft. I just didn't know it was your son that was doing it.
My middle son, he's quite the he is very artistic, and he's a carpenter, and so he puts the two together and he makes just phenomenal stuff here in Dallas.
Awesome.
Anyway, yep. It was a wonderful gift.
So, Steve, this is the first time you've been on our show. And I know you've told your story so many times, but would love to get a background on how this all got started for you.
You know, so I moved to Dallas about 24 years ago, and I was selling those credit card machines that you swipe the card, I make a cut off of, and then the bank screwed me around. So one of the companies that I'd sold a credit card machine to was a contractor in Plano, which is one of the suburbs of Dallas. And the guy had offered, he said, "Oh, I don't want one of those credit card machines." And 30 minutes later, he'd bought two. And he goes, "Hey, man, I want you to sell construction for me." I said, "No, I got this deal going with the bank." And then they cheated me. So I went back to him. I said, "Hey, is that deal still on the table to learn construction?" And Hal taught me a lot about construction. And he taught me a lot about how to deal with insurance companies. Hal's problem is that he was a liar and a con man. And
That's a big problem.
Yeah. I did learn a lot from him. But he would lie to my clients all the time. They would catch him. And it was just, so I started my own company, Steve Patrick General Contracting. And one of the guys, Chris Foster, that was working with me, he goes, "Hey, why don't we partner together and start our own construction company?" So we did that, called it Cornerstone General Contracting. That company still exists today. Chris is building $1 million homes. And in fact, he's just getting his PA license, and he's going to start doing PA work and building homes kind of 2 or 3 a year instead of like 10 a year. So anyway, and so we were doing construction, and of course, and I got introduced into doing insurance claim work with Hal. And so I learned very quickly, back then, 23 years ago, if you made a compelling, cogent argument with an adjuster that certain things were legitimate and reasonable, they had the authority to say yes, and they would. Back in the day, it was pretty simple. They were just reasonable, like you would expect reasonable people to be. And of course, as time goes by, that's becoming less and less the case than being reasonable. In fact, nowadays, the adjusters, they were working at Taco Bell 3 weeks ago. They don't even know what reasonable is. They just know to do what they're told, and that's what they do, is they do what they're told. They don't have any authority at all. They're not an adjuster.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah. And so, excuse me.
You should have beer.
I know, right? It's the beer that I had beforehand. Can you tell the slurred speech? No. And so after about 5 or 6 years working as a contractor, things had gotten really slow in Dallas, and I had my adjuster's license, but I never intended to use it as an adjuster. And Chris, my partner, said, hey, man, why don't we go and work? They had 3 hurricanes hit Florida the same year. And Ivan was the third one that hit. And he goes, why don't we go work claims? I mean, we got our adjuster's license. I said, excellent, let's go do that, because there hadn't been any hail or wind in Dallas for like 2 years. It's very rare for Dallas not to get any hail or wind for 2 years. We were doing kitchen remodels, bathroom remodels, So anyway, so we went and worked these storms. We worked that storm, then we worked Katrina. In Katrina, I was field training claims adjusters, and then I worked Wilma. And I realized in Katrina, I already realized this, that the claims adjusters were very poor at scoping property losses, and they would overlook they would overlook a lot of legitimate damage and their reasoning on the method of repair. So I thought, you know what, build a better mousetrap, find a problem, solve it. So I started my own school where I was licensing and training claims adjusters, and it went all around the nation. I did a class in Washington, D.C. with 30 students back when I had my school. So I was licensing and training claims adjusters. My goal was to be a change agent in the insurance industry and up their game so that their scoping of property losses and estimating would be vastly improved. I was naive. The insurance companies don't want them to be better. They used to. 25, 30 years ago, they would have the most incredible schools, and they would want their guys to be highly skilled and competent. And that's actually what they wanted back in the day. They don't want that anymore, I'm sorry to say. I didn't want to believe that was true. I read the book Delay, Deny, Defend. Jay Feynman. He's a professor of insurance law at Rutgers. And
I would not buy that book.
It's not in print anymore. They're supply and demand. They're a lot of money to get one of those nowadays. And I read that book, and then it dawned on me that I was wasting my time trying to be a change agent in the insurance industry. So I said, fine, I'll go back to my roots, contracting. I'll go around the nation and I'll teach contractors what I've already been teaching claims adjusters. I was already teaching the claims adjusters, to question skillfully, listen carefully, using the art of persuasion, taking off your boxing gloves and actually using the art of persuasion. And I was teaching claims adjusters the same information. It's the same stuff. So I was teaching it to them. So now I shifted, and now I spend 100% of my time coaching contractors, teaching them, educating them, helping them get everything that's legitimate and reasonable.
That's great.
Included, and nothing that isn't. And so that's what I do.
Nothing that isn't?
Yeah. I think that the insured and the contractor, every single thing, every single line item that's legitimate and reasonable should be included, and nothing that isn't. If there's any line items on an estimate that's not legitimate and reasonable, then they should strike them.
Matt had to step out for a quick second for any of those. Hey, for viewers out there, as we know, there's some legislation and bills in the state of Georgia that are being looked at and modifying some things when it comes to public adjusters here in the state of Georgia. So he had to take that quick, important call real quick. Okay. Hey, let me ask you this, Steve. Did you form the chat room, Level the Playing Field, that we have on Facebook today?
Someone has suggested that we get a Facebook group. I wish I could remember who that was that suggested that. And I said, what's a Facebook group? Because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what a chat room, a forum was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't spend a ton of time on the computer doing all that sort of thing. So I wasn't familiar. And so I called up my business partner, Tony Rugas, and I said, hey, we need to open up a Facebook group for a chat room, a forum. And he goes, well, what's that? So we didn't even know what it was. I said, if we don't mess this up, we might get 100, even 200 people, in the Dallas area that would want to join this thing. And, And so it just went over like 13,000 people. It's just nuts.
I just took a look at it right before we hopped on, and I saw that there was over 13,000 members on the, I think you call it a chat room, right? For Level the Playing Field itself.
Yeah, a forum, you know. I'm not even sure what the difference is between a chat and a forum. But anyway, and so it's funny because I look back, I was looking back over some of my goals over the last couple of years. And like 2 or 3 years ago, I had a goal set that we would have 2,000 members of Level the Playing Field. That was one of my goals, to reach that pinnacle moment where we'd have 2,000 members on the forum. And now we have like over 13,000. It's just crazy. It's
when did you start the forum?
I think it's like 4 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. Nice.
You could go on if you go in there, you can pull that up and it has the start date. I can't remember, like 4 years ago. I will tell you this, is that you can go into the stats and everything like that Facebook has, and 89% people, 89% log on and are active at least once a week.
Wow.
I don't know what anybody else's, activity rate is, but I was blown away. 89%, at least once a week they get on there. Maybe they're not chatting or anything, but they're reading. And that sounds like a really good response rate to me. I mean, I don't have anything else to compare it to. So maybe it's not that great, but it sounds pretty good to me.
Plus, you have so many members that you could just kick that other 10% off whenever.
Yeah, they're the ones that holding us all down.
Yeah, those schmucks.
No, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to go on there, and people ask good questions, and some people ask not such good questions. But hey, everybody has to start somewhere. There was a day when I was the brand spanking new, and I didn't know anything, and I started in this business. So everybody has to start somewhere. I mean, I remember I knew nothing about construction
when that happened.
Yeah,
like 3.
I didn't know the difference. What's that?
Were you like 3 o'clock or something like that? Yeah, 1 to 3.
I was.
I looked at my phone and went clock. 3 years old.
I remember. I didn't know the difference between a ceiling joist and a rafter. I mean, I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about insurance. In fact, Tony Rugas, he felt sorry for me, and he took me under his wing and taught me everything I know about insurance. And so, I mean, I knew nothing about insurance when he took me under his wing. I'd read a homeowner's policy a couple times, and I could quote a couple things, and he was impressed that a contractor could actually quote the policy. Well, all you got to do is read. And so anyway, that's how
that's
Tony
cool.
took me under his wing, and
Tony felt sorry for you, which is interesting. I think the first time that you met me, you clearly felt sorry for me as well. Kind of put your arm around me and you said, "Hey, come here, kid. Let me tell you a thing or two." And the thing or two that you told me. I think we end up we're
the internet
connectivity issues on your end.
The internet's giving us internet's giving us fits.
It sure is. So
I'd
like to talk to
Tony
you about,
Rugas.
We definitely have a delay. I'm going to let you talk, Steve. I don't want to talk over you.
I was just going to mention that Tony Rugas just had his 51st anniversary in this business. He's been doing this for 51 years. I've only been doing it for 24 years. I'm the young guy. I mean, most of the people that we teach are younger than 51 years of age. So he's been doing it longer than they.
That's a moment we can all enjoy, a nice, smooth beer.
It's the world we live in now. He's back. He's back.
It fixes everything.
There you go. I was just saying that Tony Rugas just celebrated his 51st year in the business. Most of the people that we teach aren't even 51 years of age, right? 51 years old. So, I mean, he has such a well of knowledge. It far exceeds anyone I've ever even met or even heard of. And so how fortunate am I to have him as my business partner?
I don't think many people have that opportunity like that. And obviously, if you have someone like that as your business partner, clearly you are destined to have an enormous following. So,
Oh,
right now, though,
the Lord has blessed us.
so one of the things that you are doing these days, though, is putting together these conferences or webinars. You're doing webinars now because of COVID, aren't you? On the overhead and profit, things like that?
Actually, the one on overhead and profit that we're doing on the 18th is a live event. This particular venue is going to allow us here in Dallas to be able to have it live because everybody has to be 6 feet apart. They're not going to be mask Nazis and roaming the room to make sure you have your mask on or anything like that. But they are requiring 6 foot seating at the tables. So instead of our typical 100 people in a room, we're only going to be able to have 45 people in the room, which kind of limits the number of people that can show up. But it's going to be on the 18th in what is that, 9 days here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Mid-Cities and Hurst. So that's fun. I really enjoy that class. One of the reasons I really enjoy the class is because I shift the mindset of the contractor on what overhead and profit is and how it works. And it's such a shift in mindset that how they explain things to the consumer and the adjuster is radically transformed. And the results they get are tangible and very easy to document. So that's a very fun and rewarding class to do.
Okay. To be honest, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, and it is hard to hold a conversation. So those of you that have been sticking with us through this, I appreciate you. I really do. Tony's got a lot, or Steve has a lot to offer here. But while we have a minute before we start talking about that topic, because I know the chat box is going to blow up once we start going down that path. I wouldn't mind having a little bit of background about what overhead and profit is from our attorney, Remington.
Well, we use overhead and profit just like a public adjuster or contractor would, in the sense of we look at it on Xactimate and we'll do the 10 and 10. I mean, that's what we argue. That's what the insurance company put in front of us, is to use Xactimate, right? So we'll use that same formula. There's always that conversation, and I know Steve has heard this before. Well, you got to have 3 trades, right? That they came up with that, and then once we actually say, okay, well, we got gutters, we got roof, and it looks like we got some interior. Hey, that's 3 trades. Then you'll get that pushback. So they love to provide how to obtain overhead and profit or anything else in this industry. And then once we get there, they like to argue and push back against it. Every state, though, there is case law regarding where the courts try to define what overhead and profit is. And in the state of Florida, for instance, it's when a policyholder, it would be reasonably likely for them to hire a general contractor. Mm-hmm. That's when overhead and profit should come in. And that's when you should get the 10 and 10, so to speak. So, but every state is different. I'm not speaking for all the states. I'm just speaking for the states in which I'm licensed as an attorney in. Steve, do you have anything to add? I know you have a whole class on this. So, and he goes for 2 hours. I think he's frozen up. I mean, do you see the same thing, Matt?
From a policies perspective,
that's
a lot of policies.
Go ahead,
Matt. Can be tough. Okay. So from a policy perspective, most of the policies don't have any language about overhead and profit. Some of them do. But most of them don't. And the ones that do describe it as a situation where it is its own coverage, and that I've seen. But if it's not in the policy that the insured purchases, then it usually is in some form of internal policy or procedure or guidelines that the insurance carriers use when they're trying to determine how to estimate for something. So they give a stack of guidelines. I'm sure you have piles of them as an attorney at your office somewhere. You probably sit on them. You don't even need chairs around your house, right? There's just so many guidelines.
So many documents.
They're everywhere. So you're using those guidelines as your chair. So you're sitting there throwing off guidelines and you pull one out and it talks about over and profit. It usually says, if the insured is reasonably likely to use a general contractor, then the general contractor's over and profit will be paid on the ACV payment. If, however, it is questionable on whether or not a general contractor would be used, we will pay the general contractor's over and profit if a general contractor is used or the cost of a general contractor is incurred. That's the language that I've seen. Does that jive with most of the other stack of chairs that you've got around your house?
It is. It's just so cost incurred is what they're trying to say at the end of the day. If they're saying that obtaining overhead and profit is additional coverage, I mean, is that a true RCV policy? I don't know if it is. I would argue that it's not, honestly, because the RCV policy is supposed to new materials put back in the place prior to that storm or whatever it was. So I would argue against that as well.
The whole new materials thing is something that I wouldn't mind asking Steve his opinion on. I'm going to give you a little background. I'm going to ask you a very specific question, Steve. I'm so glad you said that. This frustrates me. When a policy is replacement cost and something is damaged that is covered property on that policy, the insurance carrier can repair or replace whichever is cheaper. If it is cheaper to replace than to repair, they pay to replace it. If it is cheaper to repair it and it can be brought back to a pre-damage condition through a repair, then they are allowed to repair it. Well, what if the repair is actually a replacement of a component? Is the replacement cost provision that replaces with new materials applied?
So you're asking if there's depreciation? No, you never depreciate a repair, only a full replacement. Is that your question? I want to make sure I'm clear on your question.
The weird thing about the way I asked that question is it's misconstrued so many different ways by a certain insurance company that I'm dealing with that I really wish I could say the name of right now, but I can't. The question really becomes, and it boils down to this: does the material that is being used for repair or replacement have to be new on replacement?
Of course it does.
Of course it does.
Because a replacement cost policy is it's a betterment policy. It's not an ACV policy. It's not an indemnification policy. That's an ACV policy. It's a betterment policy. And betterment means that new for old. And an ACV policy is old for old. It's like an automobile policy. I have a 2017 F-150 truck. If, God forbid, I'm in a wreck and it's beyond repairable, then they're going to pay me for a 2017. Old for old. It's an indemnification policy, ACV. But a replacement cost policy is by definition, is a betterment policy. You're better off because you get new for old. If automobile policies were replacement cost policies, then you'd get a brand 2021 to replace the 27 betterment policy. New for old. You had an old roof and now you get a new one because it's a betterment policy. 95%, probably 99% of the adjusters out there don't even know what the word betterment means because they aren't taught these terms any longer. In fact, very few contractors in our industry know what a betterment policy is. In fact, if you were to ask what is a betterment policy, and you get deers caught in the headlights, they wouldn't have a clue what a betterment policy is. I mean, I talk about this on the forum. I probably posted about it a couple dozen times, but sometimes people don't pick up on it. And so, yeah, it's a new for old. And
Steve, I got to say this. I don't think I've ever heard anybody put it in that context. And you're exactly right, because even very seasoned public adjusters, or even attorneys for that fact, say, well, we got to put them back in their pre-loss condition. Well, if you think about it, like you said, that's an ACV policy, not the necessarily next step to betterment with RCV. I think the way you put it was just brilliant. I've never heard it put that way. And that was great. Really.
There you go for your next argument in court.
I will be using that.
There's your next argument in court. There you go. Feel free to use anything that I say, that can help the consumer out.
Absolutely.
Steve is 100% right on how that works. And the terminology you're using is terminology that was used regularly decade ago, 15 years ago, somewhere around there. It's just been, I guess it fell out of favor. But what the policies say now is that the replacement cost is without depreciation. So if there is any depreciation whatsoever, then it's not new. So it would have to be a new material. But none of the policies actually use the word new, which became a contention point for some of the claims that I'm dealing with a certain carrier.
Yeah.
They never say new. They just say replacement for like kind of quality without any depreciation for age and condition. If there's zero age, it's new. But what if it is pre-owned but never installed? For example,
then it's not new. It's old and unused. If I have a Windows 95 computer sandbox, never been opened, what's the depreciation on a Windows 95 computer? 95%, because it's of no value. And so the fact that it's sitting brand new in the box, never been opened, is not relevant to depreciation because it has no intrinsic value. It's not new. It's old and unused. There's a difference between new and old and unused.
And it's secondhand.
That's where I was going next.
Steve's argument plus the secondhand argument, it's to me, it's very white and black clear that this is not RCV material.
Let me give the context here for the rest of the audience. There are a lot of roofers out there that deal with discontinued materials, and there is a warehouse where you can get discontinued roofing materials from, and they are warehoused, and they often are purchased from a consumer and then resold to consumers outside of their original packaging, outside of the bundles that have the ASTM markings that the code requires them to be delivered in. But they are, according to the carrier, new. And according to that warehouse, new, by the way. They will not acknowledge that they are secondhand, even if they were purchased from a consumer that owned it previously. So there is, in this context, there is a chain of ownership that has changed hands. And that is where the secondhand information comes in. But as Steve is saying, and this is why I like you, Steve, you bring a completely different angle at things. I did not really consider. Say it again. So it's not new because it's not depreciated. But if it has never, even if it was not pre-owned, it's.
Would any reasonable consumer believe that a Windows 95 computer in its original packaging, never been used, would any reasonable consumer who doesn't have a financial interest say that computer is new?
They might say that it's probably worth more than a Windows Vista computer. That's my nerd joke for the night.
Steve's not ready for jokes right now. All right, we are talking about RCV. We are knee deep in this.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, fellas. Vista was crap.
Obsolescence is one of the three tests for depreciation: age, wear and tear, and obsolescence. And obsolescence is a test for depreciation. This computer they could argue the computer is obsolete, so therefore it's worth a lot more money. Would the average consumer agree? Of course not. They wouldn't pay $5 for a Windows 95 computer unless they were some computer museum who wanted to put it on display and look at this old computer that's obsolete. It's absurd. And you mentioned the code a minute ago. The building code requires that all building materials be in their original manufacturer's packaging. So if you go to a boneyard and you happen to find some tile that actually meets the correct profile, and there's a reasonably uniform appearance, still an ACV settlement on a replacement cost policy, because they've paid extra money for betterment coverage, and they're not getting betterment coverage. They're getting indemnification ACV coverage. So you spent money for this, and then when it comes time to settle with the insurance company, they're paying for this, as if you were paying premiums on an ACV policy. So you, the consumer, have paid for betterment replacement cost coverage, and they're settling the claim with indemnification ACV settlement. And that, gentlemen, is, what's the phrase I'm looking for? When they rip off consumers? Oh, it is obviously fraud. They offer this and you get that. Can't remember the phrase.
Swindle?
I'm going to be 60 in 2 weeks and my brain isn't as good as it once was. Sometimes
Steve, you're speaking my language though on it. You really are. I mean, I love the way, and what Matt said when he introduced you is that you simplify things into terms in which everybody that's in this industry, rather you've been in here for 2 weeks or 20 years, understand exactly what you're saying. I love it. And I'm going to use some of these arguments. So thank you.
Bait and switch?
The bait and switch.
Windfall?
Yeah, absolutely. Bait and switch. It's bait and switch. Thank you very much. I couldn't, for some reason, my brain went, and I couldn't think of the term. It is bait and switch. If that's not bait and switch, what is? I mean, look up the definition of bait and switch. It most certainly, you're paying for this and you're getting this. I mean, it's illusory. It's illusory coverage.
Yeah.
Let's use that same exact analogy that you used, and I loved it. You used reasonable consumer, right? If we have a Jaguar, would you want to buy that Jaguar directly from the actual dealership, or Matt buy the Jaguar?
Wait.
Yeah.
Do you mean a Jaguar?
Yeah, a Jaguar. Okay. Or would you rather, with the reasonable consumer, which I love that term, if Matt buys it, he gets a tow truck to come over, take it to his driveway. Is that reasonable consumer going to pay the same exact price for the one in his driveway or the one at the dealership? We all know he's going to pay the one at the dealership.
Unless he wants to meet me.
Yeah, well, that's probably not going to. That's probably not the reason. We're going to
say
Steve?
The Jaguar is 5 years old.
Right.
Let's say the Jaguar is 5 years old and it's never been driven. Is that a new Jaguar? Of course not. That's absurd. No reasonable consumer who doesn't have a financial interest would agree that that's a new Jaguar. It's an old, unused Jaguar.
Unfortunately,
absolutely.
Give me a break.
The attorney that I was dealing with was not a reasonable consumer. So he disagreed.
Well, I'll tell you who the reasonable consumers are. That's your jury sitting there going, you know what? My insurance company could screw me over like this too. And so that's who your reasonable consumer is, the 12.
Yeah.
I love it.
So if we can go down this rabbit hole, I enjoy this one. Apply it into a different situation, and maybe here's a scenario for a flat roof. Do you do a lot of flat roofs, Steve?
Sure.
Okay. So I've got an Epdm. It's old. It's probably close to 20 years old. It's really near at the end of its serviceable life, its warranty. And there is a bullet hole in it, right? The bullet hole is a small little area. Water has saturated into the, let's say it's ISO underneath it and spread a little ways. ISO doesn't absorb very much water, being closed cell. Now they have to repair or replace with the RCV policy. Can they replace a small area to patch where the ISO board that was wet comes out, new ISO board goes in, and they patch it, knowing that the patch is only going to last 6 months to a year because it is tying into old Epdm membrane, but the roof realistically was only going to last 6 months to a year longer anyway? Is that replacement cost?
The number one issue is you have to replace all the ISO board that's wet because it's a criminal act. And those who making the arguments for the consumer needs to word it that way. It is a criminal act to violate the building code. So the contractor has to replace all of the ISO board that's saturated. All right. So now we're not talking a 1-inch patch. You're maybe talking a square or something, depending on how, how much the water has damaged the ISO board. So let's assume it's a square. All right. Okay. So they have to, if the roof is repairable, then they repair it. And in this case, it almost certainly is repairable. And so does it leave the consumer in a diminished value on the building because of the repair? I can't see that argument can be made. So I think that probably repair is a legitimate way to handle that particular claim.
Okay, let's.
So I would, if I were adjusting the loss, I would say that your argument has not persuaded me, and I would still be saying that a repair is a legitimate way to handle that loss as an adjuster. You haven't convinced me yet.
I'll do this. All right.
Hey, I'm all for repairing repairable roofs. We don't replace repairable roofs. You repair repairable roofs. If it's repairable, then we repair it. And if it's not, then we replace it. And there's many different mitigating circumstances that can make a roof either repairable or unrepairable. In fact, I go into great length. I think I list 12 or 13 different reasons why your typical residential shingled roof is irreparably irreparable.
Let's do that. Let's define repairable then. In a shingled roof, it's very simple. You've got surrounding materials that are going to be damaged in some manner. And if you're damaging any of those materials and leaving them in worse condition than prior to the repair, then the roof would be considered non-repairable.
Yep.
So for a flat membrane roof, when you cut open a patch and replace just a square of the membrane and tie that in such a way that it really is only going to last 6 months to a year or so, and maybe that matches the existing service life of the roof as it is. But when is it not repairable? What can occur on the flat membrane roof that would deem it not repairable?
Walking on it wouldn't damage it. I mean, it would just have to be just so old, like 30, 35 years of a 20-year service life, that where walking on it would damage it. I've never been on an Epdm roof in 24 years where walking on it damages it. So it's pretty unlikely that is going to be there. Now, there could be a consideration that there's 2 inches of ISO board under that Epdm roof, and building code requires 4.5 inches, depending on where you are and which, IBC code that you're having to comply with. It could be that you have to, you have to respond to the building code and put in 4 or 4.5 inch ISO board. And
let's assume
so
you're not in an area where a patch would trigger the requirement to up the code requirement to
Code
existing
compliance.
energy codes. Let's just
You bet.
assume that that's not going to come into play.
Okay.
And
I can't think of one with a membrane roof. They're pretty repairable. There's people repair them all the time, and watertight repairs, and they're pretty repairable. Just like most slate and tile roofs, as long as you get the right profile, they're pretty repairable.
Okay. So water came in to the ISO board. It's on a metal deck. New information I haven't given you before because I was planning on putting you down this path. I planned ahead. No, I didn't. I completely forgot to tell you that part. So there is a metal deck and the water was sitting on it. And because of the bullet hole, that's where the water came from, it rusted the metal deck area. And now we have to remove enough ISO to remove a panel of the metal deck as well.
Correct, because it has been damaged by the water leak, which, it's a proximate cause. There's not an unbroken chain of events. So yes,
For most policies, yeah.
that's covered.
For the vast majority of policies, it really depends on which part of the exclusionary section rust falls under. There are a lot of policies that have rust fall under the anti-concurrent causation language section of the exclusion, but most of them don't. Most of them have them outside of that section, and that would make the approximate cause the most important thing. Yep. I have a video on that you guys can watch separately, so you guys don't have to listen to me and go into that diatribe. If I'm replacing parts of that metal deck,
yes,
does that change your prognosis for the membrane?
I don't think so. I'm open to hearing a cogent, compelling argument from you. Otherwise, but I can't think of one that I would make. But I'm open to any argument that you happen to have. I mean, go ahead.
I'm working my way through it. So there is there is code requirements whenever structure is damaged. And I think that the metal roof deck on a flat roof would be considered structural because it's holding a significant amount of weight. If there is a certain amount of structural damage on a property, then the entire undamaged portions of the same property would have to be replaced as well, which would require the full thing. I think that limit is 25% in the International Existing Building Code for most areas of the U.S. There might be something a little bit stricter than that in Florida, possibly.
I think it's 50%, but in Florida they're more generous, and so Florida it is 25%. But in most areas, it's 50%.
Yeah, I had that backwards. Thank you. So it's 50%. And then in the jurisdiction of Florida, it brings it back down to 25. But even that 25% is not structural damage for Florida. It's damage in general. So Florida's such a wonderful state. So in case that the rust has happened to 50% of the metal roof deck, we would get there. In the case that it hasn't, and we're arguing this, how do you know that the roof is likely to last 6 months to a year without the previous damage? And then if the repair brings you back to a pre-damage condition, pre-loss condition, then it has to last the full amount of the rest of the lifespan available. Now, you just said a few minutes ago that it would take a 30-something-year-old membrane roof for you to walk on it and have holes in it suddenly from you walking on it. This is 20 years old. How much lifespan does it legitimately still have? And will the repair legitimately make that full gap of time? I submit to you that it is impossible to know that. And
That's a great question. That's a great question. And since the burden is on the consumer, as the adjuster, I would say, being the devil's advocate, if I was the adjuster, I would say, okay, fine. Sounds good to me. The burden of proof is on the consumer. And if the consumer wants to make a cogent, compelling argument that it would, in fact, diminish the value of their property in some way, then I'm all ears. But the burden of proof is on the consumer because we're not talking about exclusionary language where the burden would shift to the carrier, to the adjuster. The burden's on the consumer. And so you as the PA are going to have to make that compelling, cogent argument well.
I would get an expert involved. Hey,
Well,
Remington, what would you do to make that argument?
First, and I know Steve gets this just by his comments,
He's totally
there is
on
a
top.
huge burden on the actual consumer when it comes to coverage. I fight dates of loss all the time, repairability, things like that. When an exclusion does come into play, that is when that burden shifts to the actual carrier itself. And again, I don't want to keep on beating a dead horse, but the way you are simplifying a lot of these terms, it's a beautiful thing. I'm being serious. So no, I agree with Steve on this. I really do.
What?
Yep.
I haven't convinced you either.
Nope.
You
nope.
wouldn't get
And
an
if you think
engineer
about
involved?
it, you're talking about making a repair that you said that's going to last 6 months to a year. I mean, that's a temporary repair.
It is.
And even if that roof span itself only has a year left, what is that doing? That's putting ACV products on that roof as well, right? Because you need brand new materials for RCV.
If it only lasts
I
6
just-
months, it is an ACV product. It's not a replacement product.
Exactly.
It doesn't meet the full lifespan of a normal membrane material that you install.
Right.
But is it that membrane and not the membrane underneath it around that repair that's failing at 6 months? Now I'm arguing against myself. I'm going to shut up. What Remington just said.
so either a competent flat roof crew can make a watertight seal with brand new roofing materials, brand new membrane, or they cannot. If they can, then the carrier owes for the repair. And if they cannot, then they owe for replacement. Period.
So let's
That's my
talk about
that's my
So-
opinion.
Obviously, that's not all of it, because they could caulk a hole and make a watertight repair, and that would be considered a temporary repair and not a repair good enough for a policy, because even though they can pay for repair, it has to be a proper repair. Correct?
With the loss settlement provision requires that the repair be done with materials of like kind and quality. That's one of the 3 things. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the loss settlement provision. And
So what is the quality? Is it what the current condition is of the material, or what it was originally? What
it was originally.
So originally, that repair would be expected to last the full lifespan of the membrane, and that isn't going to happen. Are you really providing a full replacement cost policy benefit if you aren't leading to a full quality, full lifespan from original material quality repair?
My position, if I was handling this as an adjuster, I would not be persuaded. I would say, you know what? As long as the materials are of like kind and quality or better, and you have a watertight seal, the roof is functioning in the manner that it was designed to function, then this is a proper repair.
How long does a typical repair or a
I know you didn't want to hear that, but that's
is there a standard repair, and is there from my experience, and this obviously isn't a standard, but most repair companies will give a 1-year warranty on their repairs for workmanship. If they can't provide that because they know upfront it's only going to last 6 months, is that a temporary repair, even if it is watertight for 6 months?
A temporary repair is a repair that you do because there's ongoing negotiation or settlement discussion between an insured or their representative and the carrier. That's the reason for a temporary repair. Calling a repair with materials of brand new, materials of like kind and quality, or better, that's a watertight seal, calling that a temporary repair, that's not temporary repair. I'm sorry. You haven't persuaded me. I remain unpersuaded. As a claims adjuster, if I were handling that claim, I would remain
I
unpersuaded.
feel like Steve's the kind of adjuster with just say, our position stands, and that's all he would send you.
I would say that you haven't made a compelling argument to change. The facts and evidence that you've provided are insufficient to make a compelling argument for me. I want to agree with you. As a claims adjuster, I make more money if I replace the whole roof. I'm an IA. I make far more money if I replace the whole roof. I want to agree with you, but you have to make a compelling argument that so that I can say, yeah, they made a compelling argument, and here's their argument. Boom, 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 with my file examiner, so that I can look at them as a straight face as a claims adjuster and say, you know what? He's right, and here's why. Boom, 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 boom. And if I can't do that with the argument that you're making, then I'm not going to go to my file examiner and look like a fool.
I love it. Here's my definition of a temporary repair. It's a repair that's made to mitigate or to stop any further damages when that policyholder has the intent to actually make a full replacement at some time in the future in which that temporary repair is going to be removed. That's kind of where I go with the temporary repair.
Would this fall under that?
Well, does that policyholder at the end of this adjustment of this claim, are they going to repair, or are they going to replace this roof system?
What if a contractor were to put in writing that they would never repair an Epdm roof or this particular Epdm roof because the repair would only last 6 months, that they would recommend replacement? Would that make a difference for you, Steve?
He's not sold.
No.
I can already tell.
The reason why it wouldn't is because they had 6 to 12 months anyway, and they still have the 6 to 12 months. They're in the same position as they were pre-storm. As long as they're in the same position, both financially and functionally, as they were before the storm, I don't see any reason why this isn't a legitimate repair.
All right, so
They're in the same position.
I know I gave you the information that the roof was only going to last 6 months to a year longer. But in the event that we'd be arguing this and I didn't give you that information, would you have to have the burden of proof to say that it was only going to last another 6 months to a year if that was your reason for denial?
Nope, I wouldn't have to have the burden. I have the burden of proof on exclusions.
So you're providing that.
Rand Man has posted a not a question but a statement here. I believe the burden of proof is on the insured and named perils policies, and the burden is on the carrier and open perils policy. A lawyer question, and so I'm not a lawyer, so I know that generally speaking.
Is that true?
Here,
the burden
when any claim, I think Steve's
still going.
Is on a consumer to pull me $100. If I were to come to Matt and say, Matt, you owe me $100, he's going to say, prove it. He doesn't have to prove I don't owe him $100. I have to prove he does. The burden of proof is on me, the claimant, because I'm contending that he owes me money. I'm the claimant.
That's 100% correct. Anytime.
So the burden of proof is on claimant to prove that the loss is covered. That there exists a loss. There you are. You're back.
Hey.
No, Steve, I agree with you. Yeah, we can hear you, and I agree with you 100%. Especially when it gets on my.
Yeah,
you're going off and on.
It's a hard time.
Well, that's my life. That's my life, off and on.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. Once a case or file or claim gets on my desk, I immediately have to be on the offense. I have to prove causation. I have to prove that it's covered. I have to prove the extent of the damages. I have to prove how much it's going to cost to replace or repair these damages. That all falls on me. And people have, in this industry, you have to look at it this way. Let's just put it on a criminal set. We are the state prosecutors. We have to bring a case in front of a jury and prove our case. Not the same burden, but that is our responsibility as plaintiffs or policyholders or advocates for policyholders. Is we have to bring the proof to the table for the jury to say, yes, this is a covered peril, number one. And number two, I think it's going to cost X amount. We have to do it on every single claim, regardless of the policy.
Pretty much. Yep.
All right, question from the audience. We have a low slope argument ongoing currently. What if a low slope EPDM goes under an existing shingled slope? Shingles have been fully bought. Won't the EPDM be consequently damaged during the shingle removal process? Term bar is also bought because there is a shingled border around the EPDM. At what point does the EPDM need fully replaced due to the repairs around it? EPDM is not damaged itself, but the border has to be completely removed to replace shingles, and it goes 3 feet up the shingled, and that's all we got from it.
So the termination bar is bought. Okay, so again, you're asking me questions that if I were the claims adjuster, I would say then replace the EPDM up to the 3 feet. And if the EPDM has not been compromised by the removal and the replacement of the shingle roof, I don't know. I guess an argument could be made that the EPDM it was used in lieu of felt. And this is your underlayment. And I guess an argument can be made that the EPDM is the underlayment, and so therefore the shingles and the underlayment should be replaced, because if it was felt, you'd be replacing the underlayment. Well, guess what? In this particular case, the EPDM is the underlayment. Who says that a consumer can't use better products as their underlayment than felt? And so if that's the argument I would make if I was on the consumer side, that argument would
interesting argument.
That would probably persuade me as the adjuster, is that I would call the EPDM an underlayment, and you always replace the underlayment on every other shingled roof. Why would this be any different? Well, because this is EPDM. So who's to say that the consumer can't use a better product as their underlayment, i.e. EPDM? In this particular case, it's precisely what they have done, is they've used this as a better underlayment.
First, I just want to throw this in there real quick, Matt. I don't think, well, I haven't talked to him, so I don't know. But the viewers out there right now need to just be soaking this up like a sponge. Like all this information that's coming. Like, Steve, you're providing, secrets that you use as angles to get things covered, to get things paid. And I'm kind of blown away about all the information that's going on. I'm being serious. The viewers need to really soak this up.
You're very correct.
I mean, this is the benefit of having Steve Patrick on your show. You can get into the weeds in something weird, and he's going to go down that path with you, and he's going to bring it around in such a way that you weren't expecting, because Steve just thinks differently. And you honestly just want to help.
I am very different, so.
You are very different.
You want me to tell you the truth? You want me to tell you how I come up with such great answers? Because the truth is, I'm not that smart. That's the real truth. I'm not that smart. The truth is, I pray for wisdom. James 1:5 says, let him who lacks wisdom, that's me, pray, and the Lord above, who doesn't lay fault, will give wisdom. I mean, even I, as simplistic as I am, can read. It says, if you ask, then he'll give you wisdom. So every day, almost every day, some days I forget, I pray for wisdom, knowledge, and insight. And he gives it to me. It's just that simple. It takes me 5 seconds a day to do that. And so he gives me wisdom, knowledge, and insight. Heck, Anyone out there could be the wisest person they've ever met by simply taking 5 seconds a day and ask the Lord for wisdom. And so that's the reason why I'm given such great answers, is because I ask. So yeah, they can leave it about half your audience will, will agree with that, and about half of your audience will say that's nonsense. And I understand that that's lots of people's position. So anyway,
I usually put that on, and that gives.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Steve, let me ask you this. How long have you been in this industry? I know you talked about your story, contractor, PA, then back kind of to the contracting realm. How long have you been in this industry for?
24 years.
Yeah. What are the top 1 to 2 tips that you have for all the listeners out there in your 24 years of experience?
Keep things simple. All right. Take your, let's say that you've written up an argument, boil it down to its essence and keep it simple, and then boil it down to its essence again and keep it simple. If you make a really compelling, cogent argument that's short and sweet, people are going to read it. If you make this long, drawn-out argument that takes pages for people to read, then they're not even going to bother to read your argument, because it's like a data dump. So you want to boil things down to its essence and keep things simple. If you were to have to explain this to your freshman in high school, your child, and you had to explain it in a manner that they can grasp it, that's how you should probably be, making your argument with the appraiser or the adjuster or whoever it is that, the carrier's attorney, whoever it is that you're dealing with. Ask questions. Oh my. Professional will ask about 90% questions, at least 80% questions, maybe even 90%, and only make 10 or 20% of their conversation would be statements. They would be asking questions. It's the art of persuasion. Master the art of persuasion. I've purchased like 50 books in the last year on the art of persuasion, and I've read I think around 15 or 16 of them. And so here I am, going to be 60 years old in weeks, and I'm studying the art of persuasion as much as I ever have. So how about you guys that are 20, 30, 40 years old? What's your excuse? I mean, the average millionaire reads 50 books a year. So how are you, if you aren't willing to make an investment into yourself, why should anyone else make an investment into you? So make the investment into yourself. And if you want to know, I put on my Level the Playing Field on a regular basis books that I recommend that you read. If you want to learn how to negotiate, read Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. By far the best book on negotiation that I've ever read. Nothing even comes close. So I didn't read the book. I never have read Never Split the Difference, but I have studied it 3 times. And there's a difference between reading a book and studying it, isn't there? So learn how to ask questions. Question skillfully, listen carefully. Anytime you're dealing with someone on the insurance carrier, you should be asking an abundance of questions. In fact, you should ask so many questions that your counterpart would say, wow, you're an inquisitive person. And say, well, yeah, I don't know everything. And so I presume that you're an intelligent person. So that's the reason why I asked the question, so I can learn from you.
Love it. It's basically an ego stroke.
Yeah.
I think he was preaching to you a little bit about dumbing it down for the average person.
Yeah. Well, okay.
He's seen your emails.
Read this one.
Influence people.
I like it.
My
he's talking to you, Matt.
My number one.
He's talking straight to you.
Yeah, my number one most recommended book is this. Study this book. It teaches you human behavior. And it teaches you how not to manipulate people, although you can learn to manipulate people with this book if that's your heart. It teaches you how to cause people to want to do that which is in their best interest and how to compel them to do so. Oh man, best book I've ever written outside the Bible. How to Win Friends and Influence People. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Ask questions. Stop making statements. I was teaching a class. I was doing a 2-day private training class about 6 weeks ago. And one of the fellows had attended the first day where I was talking about question skillfully, listen carefully, stop making statements. And he had an adjuster appointment the morning of the second day. So when he got through, he came back to the class and he said, I just put into practice what you had mentioned. I said to myself, I'm not going to make a single statement when meeting this adjuster on this borderline roof. All I'm going to do is ask questions. And he says, it was amazing how that the appointment went so different than other appointments that I go to. Of course, because instead of you being the authority and saying to the adjuster that I'm right and you should agree with me, rather what you do is you ask the adjuster what his point of view is and how he arrived at that conclusion, and it gives him the impression that he's the one with the authority. That's the beauty of asking questions. You know, most people don't realize that the person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. This is not new stuff. I mean, you can read books that are thousands of years old, and they do the exact same thing. The person asking the questions is in control of the conversation. So learn how to turn statements into questions. Learn how to question skillfully. Listen carefully. Most people are horrible listeners. Much of the time when I'm in a conversation with people, or at least some of the time nowadays, is instead of listening to what they're saying, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. I mean, how incredibly rude is that? So what I've learned to do is when a person makes a statement, what I'll do is I'll say, if I understand your question correctly, and I'll pose it back to them, reword it so that it's not if you say the exact same words, it comes off as rude. So you reword what they said. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying or what you're asking is blah, blah, blah. Man, that is so beautiful, because at that point they can say, yes, that's what I'm saying, or they can say, no, that's not what I meant at all. And they'll rephrase it, and you go, oh man, I'm glad I asked the question, because otherwise I would have thought that you meant this when you actually meant that. And so the other thing is, when the other person, this is whether you're in a sales situation, you guys are trying to bring on a new client, or you're dealing with someone in the claims department, when you ask them questions and you say, do you mind if I take notes? And then write down their answers. What do you think that you're communicating to the other human being when you're taking the time to write down what they say? What are you communicating to them?
If it's an adjuster and it's me, I'm communicating to them that I'm about to take them to task and they're going to freak out.
What Steve's saying is that you're actually respecting what they have to say when it's.
I care enough about you. Yeah. Right? This is such simple stuff. Another thing you can do, hardly anyone does this. When you get back to the office, you write a quick note. Let's see, where am I? Right here.
We got Steve fired up. I love it.
I got a box of brand new notes because I ran them out of my other ones. And so when I meet a person, most people will write a note, a handwritten note at the end once you conclude your business with someone, and you should do that. You should do that. A handwritten note, thank you very much for your business. I appreciate you, blah, blah, blah. But here's a secret that hardly anyone does. And this is really good in sales. You meet a prospective client or you meet an adjuster and you write them a handwritten note and you mail it to them and say, you know what? I so appreciated visiting with you today. I really appreciate you. And I really appreciate the things that you said today. And you list a couple things that they said. They appreciate you actually being able to quote them. I mean, how many times have you gotten a handwritten note from anyone in the mail? What kind of impact would that make? So if I'm your prospective client, Matt, and you want me to hire you as a public adjuster, I'm talking to 3 public adjusters. How do you set yourself apart? Boom. Ain't nobody else out there doing that. Ain't nobody else out there giving a handwritten note. I really enjoyed visiting with you today. and I appreciate you. Don't say I appreciate what you've done for me or anything. I appreciate you, and I look forward to serving you in the future. Put it that way. I look forward to serving you. And if you write that, you know what the chances are of you actually picking up the client versus the other two guys? They just gone through the roof because you actually cared enough to write a handwritten note at the beginning of the relationship or before the relationships ever comes to fruition, and no one does that.
It's a lost art.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Patrick. Listen, Steve, I'm glad you were on the show today. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and I think it's great. What are you doing right now you'd like everybody to be aware of and join you?
Oh man, the last 2 weeks in February I'm so slammed, it's crazy. So I'm doing I do a general contractors overhead and profit master course like 3 times a year, every 4 months. We're doing one here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the mid-cities in Hurst, Texas, on the 18th. So today is the 9th, so that's 9 days from now we're doing that class. There's only 45 spots because of the COVID. You know, you have to be 6 feet apart and everything in this particular venue. So they're limiting us to 45 seats. We're going to sell out for sure. We usually do about 100 people in one of these classes. So I'm doing that on the 18th. Paul and Kim Reed have partnered with Tony Rugas and I to start a commercial roofing academy. And so we're doing a quick start school to kick off the year-long academy so that we teach those individuals, whether they're a residential roofer and they want to learn commercial roofing, maybe I had a guy call me today. They've been doing commercial roofing for 5 years. He wants to come to the academy because they're learning by trial and error. By coming to the academy, they're going to be sitting at the feet of multimillionaire successful, commercial contractors that have made every mistake that they can make, and they survived it, and they can learn at the feet of the subject matter experts. We have a couple of PAs that are coming because they do residential public adjusting now, and they want to learn the commercial roof. They want to learn the large loss commercial public adjusting.
I'm picturing torch down accidents right now.
Well, yeah, precisely. Hey, you know what? I've seen buildings burned to the ground due to torch down.
That's not funny. Burn victims are not funny, Matt.
So there you go. So we're gonna be having that. We're gonna have the quick start school kicking off the year-long commercial roofing academy in Denver on 26th and 27th. And so if anyone's interested in that, they can call me on my phone, 214-244-2639. I'll be happy to visit with you on the phone and, explain.
Say that number one more time. Olivia's going to type it in.
Okay. Yeah. 214-244-2639. And anyone who wants to call me, I'll be happy to visit with them and answer any questions they may have about the academy.
That's fantastic. Are you going to be at the Win the Storm as well?
Oh, absolutely. COVID permitting, it's been moved to the last couple of days in March, and then I think April 1st, April 2nd. I think it's the 31st, 1st and 2nd, I think.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So I was at the second one back when it was small, and I've gone to every one since. We as a company get a lot of benefit. We meet a lot of folks, and a tremendous benefit for us at Win the Storm. So we're definitely going to be there again this year. Absolutely.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you out there. And I really appreciate your time today. We've gone a little bit over time, but yeah. Is there any final statements, Steve?
I enjoyed our time visiting in the past, Matthew, and I really appreciate you. And you are a very good PA. I don't know if the folks know that, but I'm here to say that
I'm not good enough to convince you. So,
and Remington, I've never met you before, so it's very very enjoyable getting to know you and visiting with you, and so this has been a good time. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You too, Steve. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure, and I meant it. You are a book of wisdom. You really are. You were asking for it, and you got it. So yeah, I appreciate your time.
Join our Level the Playing Field. So if you're not already a member of our forum, online forum, Level the Playing Field, Then you can text the word forum, FORUM, to 214-496-5182. You can also text the word ebook with no hyphen or dash, just EBOOK, to that same phone number to download my free ebook, Level the Playing Field. The number is 214-496-5182. There are my free takeaways for the day, and you're crazy if you don't get those two for free.
Thanks again, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
talk to you later. That was Steve Patrick. And if you ever talk to Steve Patrick, well, you're going to be blown away.
He knows what he's talking
goes
about.
at things in a completely different angle. I honestly don't think about things the way he does. Our brains work differently, and I really appreciate that about him. Sorry for any of the technical difficulties that we had during this call today, guys. Yep, we're totally going to get some handwritten notes. I can feel it going into the mail right now. So, and if I don't, to be honest, I don't know if I got one the first time I met him.
Yeah.
Being honest.
Maybe he didn't read the book yet.
Maybe.
I'm gonna give him the benefit of the
Maybe he
doubt.
just didn't like you that much. Didn't
He
want to work with
probably
you again.
Ooh, Olivia coming over here,
No doubt about
cutting at the knees. Love it.
it. Probably.
I'm the hat.
Steve's an all-time good.
The hat.
All right. So thanks for hanging in there with us. And we will see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. for the next one.
See you guys. Nice talking with you.